I'm 2023 Daytona 500 winner, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and you're watching Cup Connection.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Massaro, and welcome to Cup Connection. As I'm sure you've heard, all the talk this week has been about Hendrick Motorsports. Now, they definitely dominated in Phoenix, but that's not what the discussion is about. Not at all. It comes down to something that happened before practice even started last weekend. That's when NASCAR confiscated each of the team's hood louvers. And this week, Hendrick was hit with historic penalties. Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson, and William Byron were each penalized 100 regular season points and 10 playoff points. Plus, all four crew chiefs have been suspended 4 races, and they received a $100,000 fine each. That's a combined total of $400,000 for Hendrick. It's the largest fine for a single organization in history. Now, Hendrick wasn't alone. College Racing was also dinged for the same penalties for the 31 car. And finally, Denny Hamlin. He received a $50,000 fine and lost 25 points for intentionally wrecking Ross Chastain. There's lots to talk about this week, so we thought we'd bring in one of the sport's most knowledgeable insiders to discuss. Joining us now is my good friend from NBC Sports, senior motorsports writer Nate Ryan. Nate, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Mike. It's great to see you.
So you may have heard there were some penalties handed down this week. I guess Hendrick Motorsports is going to lose their crew chiefs and going to spend a little bit of money. When you heard about this, what did you think?
My first reaction was not entirely surprised that NASCAR dropped the hammer on the mic, because they've been saying since the outset of the next-gen car, when this new model was rolled out last year, that there were going to be really, really severe penalties if NASCAR felt teams had altered the parts. And that's essentially what they say Hendrick has done here, that they've taken these hood louvers and manipulated them in a way that NASCAR was not comfortable with. So it wasn't entirely surprising to me that NASCAR would have these, biggest penalties in NASCAR history, not an exaggeration, $400,000 fine, 4-race suspension for crew chiefs, huge points penalties to each team and driver. Like, that part wasn't all that surprising me, but I'm still struggling with the fact that they took these away at Phoenix after practice on Friday, and then Hendrick was just as fast Saturday and Sunday. So I don't know what kind of impact. I don't know if the punishment is justified in this instance by the crime. But as you know, that's kind of how NASCAR operates. Like, when they say they're going to lay the hammer down, they do.
So it didn't take them off their game last week, as you pointed out. But losing crew chiefs, that many of them all at once, I mean, that's got to have an impact heading into this week, no?
Yeah, and it seems like that would be the biggest blow here, Mike, is that obviously those are your coaches. I mean, those are your at-track guys who keep everybody in line and know how things work. And even though Hendrick, unfortunately, has been through this before, they've dealt with crew chief suspensions. I'm sure they have a very rigorous process into how Alan Gustafson or Cliff Daniels, crew chiefs for the 9 car and for Kyle Larson, how they'll communicate with their teams at the track when they're not allowed to be there. It's still a lot, I think. And especially when you're talking about Atlanta Motor Speedway this weekend, it's only the 3rd race on this surface. Things are different. It's definitely going to be, it's going to be a curveball, but Hendrick, as you know, Mike, has a really deep bench. They've got Greg Ives, who was the crew chief for Dale Jr. and many others, Alex Bowman through the years. So he's a winning crew chief. He's going to be one of the fill-in guys. So if there's a team that's not going to affect, it's probably going to be Hendrick.
And I've seen in the past Hendrick have penalties like this before. I can't remember the exact year, but I remember Chad Knaus getting suspended one time, and then I think Darian Grubb filled in. They won the race.
Right.
So that kind of speaks to your point of them having a lot of depth. So it does shake up the standings in an interesting way, though. I mean, I saw, the point deduction, 100 points per driver, also 10 playoff points. I think it's far-fetched to think that these drivers don't get a win eventually, but there's the possibility that Alex Bowman doesn't get a win, or maybe Kyle Larson doesn't get a win. I think they will. But if they don't, could this potentially have an impact on who makes the playoffs?
I mean, you're right, Mike. That's the big question here. Is it does put Kyle Larson and Alex Bowman in must-win situations, presuming that Hendrick is appealing this penalty, presuming they don't knock those points penalties down at all. But even if they knock them down significantly, even if they went from 100 points to 50 points, it's still going to be a really tall order, I think, for those drivers to make it now without a win. But that being said, I think everybody expects that, just like William Byron, their teammate who has won back-to-back races, everybody expects that Kyle Larson, it's just a matter of time for him to win a race. Maybe less so Alex Bowman, even though he's, had victories in each of the last 3 seasons. I think there's still maybe a question mark there for that team, because he isn't the proven winner that Kyle Larson is. And Chase Elliott, obviously Chase Elliott is in a different situation. He's going to be must win regardless, because when he comes back from his broken leg, he was going to have to win anyway. But it essentially just puts all of the Hendrick drivers now in a must-win situation, aside from William Byron, who has won in the last 2 races.
Coincidentally, Chase Elliott actually moved up the standings because of this. So I find that interesting. We talk about Chase Elliott and a waiver. Any reason to believe he won't get a waiver? I mean, obviously you think he would. He's the most popular driver. The series stands to benefit by him being eligible for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think despite all the discussion and debate over, should this 2020 champion and 5-time most popular driver, should he have been snowboarding the day before he was going to be practicing qualifying his car, I still think that there's no question in my mind that if you just look at NASCAR and what they've done in the past, NASCAR says each case is evaluated independently, that there are no real precedents set here. But if you just look at what they've done they gave Kyle Busch a waiver for a similar injury, broken leg. Granted, his injury happened because of a crash at Daytona, but I still think NASCAR will apply that reasoning and say, hey, it's a medical waiver. It doesn't really matter how the guy gets injured. If he's out, when he comes back, he's allowed to win a race and make the playoffs.
And Kyle Busch took that waiver and went on to win the championship. So,
right.
That's a good story in itself. So we talk about the Hendrick penalties, but they weren't the only penalties handed down this week. Colleague also got penalties, but the one I think other people are talking about is the one to Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin fully admitting he intentionally wrecked Ross Chastain. What'd you take from that?
Well, my first source of amusement here, Mike, is that the name of this podcast, which I believe just completed its 4th episode that got Denny Hamlin in trouble. He started this podcast this year called Actions Detrimental. Well, it couldn't be any more meta. I mean, he's going now to be penalized by NASCAR for actions detrimental that happened on this podcast, that pretty much eminently predictable that he would get in trouble for something he said on. I mean, that's the point of Denny Hamlin starting this podcast this year, I think, was because he sometimes speaks with breathtaking candor. But as you know, from having covered him for many years as well, a lot of times that gets him sideways with NASCAR, unfortunately. I mean, I don't think NASCAR should ever penalize somebody for something they said within reason, provided it's not like inciting violence or something. Right. But I get why they're doing it. And especially when you have a long running feud that you have here, Ross Chastain versus Denny Hamlin. If one of them comes out and says, yeah, I meant to wreck that guy the way Denny Hamlin said about Ross Chastain, I think NASCAR felt as if they were forced to react.
Fans love the conflict, though. They love the conflict, right? So does this go all the way back? I mean, you say long-running feud. Did this go back to Martinsville last year? I mean, Martinsville, Ross Chastain, the crazy wall move that essentially knocked Denny out of the playoffs?
I think that's part of it, Mike. I think it even goes back before that. I mean, they had a few run-ins during the season. Gateway was the most memorable one, where Ross Chastain did something that took Denny Hamlin out unintentionally. It was just like an innocent bystander. But then Denny Hamlin messed with Ross Chastain for the rest of that race and pretty much affected him in any way possible. Brake checked him, slowed down in front of him. Denny Hamlin, by the way, wasn't penalized when he did that. And I think that shows the difference between that incident and this one, in that was retaliation within a race. This time, Denny Hamlin openly admitted, I'm just retaliating for how I feel for things that have happened over the past year and a half or whatever. I think if it would have happened within the context of this race, if Ross Chastain had spun him out or something, NASCAR might have looked at it differently. But the fact that he was just so brazen that Denny Hamlin said, I'm doing this because I'm paying Ross Chastain back for all this list of incidents that happened weeks, months ago. So I think that's where he got in trouble.
But where does it end? Who knows? We'll have to pay attention. There's a lot of racing remaining. Now, Atlanta is this week. I want to kind of focus there now. Chevrolet, Hendrick being a very big part of it, has dominated this year. Is there discussion right now of possibly a perceived advantage for that manufacturer?
I think clearly in year 2 of the next gen, Mike, Chevrolet and Hendrick, as you note, specifically have just come out ahead of the game. And I think a lot of people expected this. I mean, they are the best team in NASCAR. They've won all those championships and races for a reason. So I think they did their homework in the offseason, and they clearly have an edge. Atlanta, though, should be more of a jump ball because, as I said, I mean, they resurfaced this track last year. It's very much a drafting track like Daytona and Talladega. So it should be more up in the air. There should be more opportunities for Ford and Toyota drivers to excel this weekend that they really haven't had as much the last 3 weeks. And especially the Fords, they ran really well at Daytona. This is a huge opportunity for a guy like Brad Keselowski, who he ran well at Phoenix as well. But like, I think he's got this one definitely circled. And I think the Chevy dominance, definitely could come to an end this weekend.
You feel like Keselowski is gaining on it? This is a new move to this team, becoming an owner. He's still looking for that success that I think he had in his mind when he made the move.
Yeah, it seems like he is. And I was a little bit skeptical, Mike, because I mean, a lot of last year, Chris Buescher, his teammate, outran him at a lot of tracks, like NASCAR has been to the last 3 weeks, like Phoenix and Vegas and Fontana. And I think that there was maybe cause for concern there, but it does seem like he's now picked it up, and Brad Keselowski he's not quite in 2012 championship form yet, but I think we've seen more flashes of that recently. But as you know, he's a great super speedway racer. So I would expect him to be in the mix regardless at Atlanta.
Well, I agree with you. All right, before I let you go, what else are you watching out for in Atlanta?
I think the pit entry is going to be really interesting. NASCAR has adjusted where drivers enter the pits at this track. It's not in the traditional area that it was for however many years, decades, where it was coming off of turn 4. Now it's coming off of the back straightaway. And we've already seen drivers talking about this. I think it's going to be really interesting to see, because Atlanta now, as I mentioned, is a drafting track. It's a super speedway track. Cars are a lot more in packs. They're not as spread out. So they haven't made a green flag pit stop in Atlanta in, I think, more than a year and a half, because they had so many cautions at both the races last year. That'll probably be the case again this year. But if they have a long green flag run and someone gets caught in the mix and is trying to pit at a totally different location that they've been in at this track for years, we could see a lot of calamity on Sunday.
Calamity. That'll get people's attention. All right, lots of reason to watch. Nate, we appreciate your time here today. Thank you so much. We hope to join you again sometime down the road.
It was great to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Per usual, Nate bringing some great information. As you heard he and I discuss, one person who is familiar with being pulled off the bench to fill in for a suspended crew chief is Darian Grubb. Now, you may recall back in 2006, he stepped in for Chad Knaus while Knaus served a suspension. And during that time, Grubb was able to win 2 of the 4 races he was involved with. That includes the sport's biggest race, the Daytona 500. Now, Grubb is now with Trackhouse Racing as the Director of Performance. He's also the crew chief for their 3rd car, which is known as Project 91. It's reserved for international drivers. It'll have Kimi Räikkönen, former Formula One champion, behind the wheel at COTA in a couple of weeks. Now, Grubb has spent time with various organizations. That includes Hendrick, Gibbs, and Stewart-Haas. He has 23 wins and helped Tony Stewart win the 2011 championship. Joining us now is former Cup Series championship crew chief, Darian Grubb. He's with us. He's, of course, with Trackhouse Racing now. Thanks for being with us, Darian.
Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you here. We were just talking with Nate and Ryan about the story of the week. Of course, that's Hendrick Motorsports and Colleague Racing getting hit with heavy penalties. What Nate and I talked about was Hendrick now having to go to its bench to bring in other people to be crew chiefs. Now, I just thought of you immediately because you were super sub, man. In 2006, you came off the bench, you filled in for Chad Knaus and won a couple of races, including the Daytona 500. What's that like as a guy who wasn't expecting to be on top of the pit box to do that?
Yeah, a pretty tall order to jump in there, but honestly, it was an honor being able to work with Jimmy Johnson at that point at Daytona 500 and going out there and pulling off that win. So that's really what kick-started my crew chiefing career. I had never thought about doing that at that point. And like you said, we had good success, had 2 wins in 4 races and really started the season off right. So the biggest thing is going there and making sure you keep your team together and make sure everybody's working together, but it can springboard somebody's career and or their season at least.
Well, you're proof positive that it can be done and it can be done very well. I want to segue now to what you'll be doing in a couple of weeks. You'll be back on top of the pit box as the crew chief for Kimi Räikkönen. You did it last year at Watkins Glen, right? So you've got a little experience. So what do you expect?
Yeah, it's kind of the other end of my career now, where I'm jumping back up on the box after getting that start that way. It's amazing. Honestly, Kimi Räikkönen is an ultimate professional. He came in last year to a really new situation, kind of a rushed deal, and kind of put him in there. He did all the work, all the homework beforehand, and he's doing the same thing this year. He's already studying. He's already checking up on what's different between the rules and the packages for 2023. So we're really looking forward to getting out there with that Chevy Camaro and being competitive. That's his goal. He had so much fun last time that he knew by mid-race he got to where he was really comfortable and moving forward, running into the top 10. So now he knows he can go out there and be competitive. So he wants to go get a chance to go qualify better since he's done that once. All the things he learned, now he wants to excel at going back again.
So I read some of his comments after Watkins Glen talking about how he needed to ramp up. There was so much to learn. When you go to the Circuit of the Americas, it's a track where he's been several times. In fact, he won there in F1. How much of a benefit is that for you guys?
That's a huge benefit. Obviously, the cars are completely different, and the track's been paved in some sections since then, and some of the other aspects are different. But just the fact of knowing the track layout, having been there and run lots of laps, we can actually cut back on our simulator work and the training that he has to do, because that part's he knows pretty well. So now it's all about just going and making laps and getting a good qualifying effort. Luckily, we do have the practice session, so he'll be able to acclimate to the car and be ready to go. And the racecraft portion of it, I don't think we're really going to have to worry about with him. He's ready to go.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. You talk about the simulator work. How much time is he spending there?
He hasn't come to the U.S. yet since last year with the Watkins Glen. So we've done some stuff online, kind of working together with him, but we're going to really hit that hard next week when he gets into the country and get a little prep work going right before we go down to COTA.
All right, so Formula One, obviously those cars, especially the Ferrari that he won with at COTA years ago, a lot more sophisticated than a Cup car. Not to say that a Cup car isn't sophisticated. It is plenty sophisticated. Well, what's the biggest adjustment you think for him?
I think it's not having all the driver adjustment controls in the car, his ability to being able to go in and change the bar settings and things as he goes around the lap, and changing the aero platform, all the hydraulics and things that they run. But that's honestly one of the things that amazed him when he came over and we went through a lot of the things to prep work, is he didn't realize how technical the Cup Series actually was. I mean, you're dealing with engineers all day, every day, all of our prep work and the data behind it and the feeds that we get from the racetrack and what we're trying to chase is very similar to what they did in F1. He didn't really realize how technical it was with that. So now he understands it. He's asking for even more information, which is great. So we're able to go out there and just keep feeding that animal.
I was going to say, how do you bridge that gap?
The biggest thing is just getting more data and running through more video, going through actually explaining some of the tire data, what we think is going to happen with the tire degradation and how we're going to run the scenarios. Obviously, this race will be different than what we have with Watkins Glen, with not having planned cautions at the stage breaks. So the chances of the green flag running and or the pit strategy is going to be drastically different. So, but that's more like what he's used to with F1. Those races ran from start to finish, and it was all about the tire strategy and the fuel strategy at that point too. So I think it's going to be more in his wheelhouse and more to understand, but it's also a new aero package for us. It's a new tire. It's a lot of new things for us. So we're going in really with a lot of unknowns, and we're going to learn those things during that 50-minute practice.
Yeah, you mentioned all the new variables. Does that change expectations? You went there with Trackhouse last year and won the race with Ross Chastain. So I'm just wondering if the expectations are to match that same achievement.
It really is. I mean, we feel like we've come off the season really kind of hitting the same tracks and the same performance that we had last year. So we've been able to run up front each week with Daniel and Ross both. So we're really hoping to continue that momentum. Obviously, all the road courses were good for us last year. So the package is different. We haven't raced that yet, but we feel like a lot of our same prep work still should come out the same. We're hoping to get some of those same results.
We talked about you being back on top of the pit box at COTA, but I know you've got a full-time job there at Trackhouse. Give us a little insight as to what you do on a day-to-day basis there.
It's more kind of the engineering lead for the whole organization. I work with all the race engineers, all of our simulation tools, the simulator, the aero group, our chassis department, all the other groups that we kind of pull everything together. And then we have a huge resource with Chevrolet Racing Group and the GM Tech Center So I really help coordinate all those efforts and making sure we're answering all the questions we have, putting all the data together, and just kind of directing the performance overall of what we can put together. Everything from the pit stops, pit crew, all the way through to the actual engineering and the tire pressures in the car. So it's kind of pulling it all together and making sure we can get the resources we need to go fast.
And it looks for me, sitting in my home watching the races on television, that Trackhouse is pretty competitive right now. How would you assess the way the season's gone?
So far, so good. We've got a few things we know we're ready to grow on. We're ready to keep working on trying to excel. We have new data coming in every day. We're always learning. And that's the best part, is we're not sitting stagnant. We didn't sit on last year and say, all right, we had a good season, let's go back and recreate that. No, we want to be better. We knew Justin has this deal with the 235 feet. That's how far we lost the championship by last year. So now you drive over that every morning when you come into work, and it is a subtle reminder of what can I do better to make myself and my team better for this year to accomplish that 235 feet.
All right. Well, Darian, we've taken enough of your time already. We appreciate it, and we wish you the best of luck, not only at COTA, but for your entire organization as you head to Atlanta this weekend.
Thanks a lot, guys. It's great to be on.
All right, Darian has a little time to prepare because COTA isn't until next week. No reason to believe Trackhouse Racing can't make some noise this week, though. After all, a year ago, they were very strong in Atlanta. In particular, Ross Chastain. Not only did he lead laps in both races, he was the runner-up in both of them as well. Meanwhile, his teammate, Daniel Suarez, finished 4th and 6th. Now, if this race is anything like the races a year ago, they are definitely going to be exciting. The track changes, in particular, the higher banking, has made Atlanta race a lot more like Daytona and Talladega, with drafting becoming critical. Now, if there's one organization that adapted to those changes quickly, it was the one we've been talking about all week long, Hendrick Motorsports. A year ago, William Byron won this race. Now he comes into this week carrying the hot shoe after back-to-back victories. And Chase Elliott won the fall race. Of course, Josh Berry is still behind the wheel of the 9 car. It'll be interesting to see how Hendrick responds this week, heading to a track where they have a strong package, but they also have 4 interim crew chiefs. Definitely a lot to watch. We appreciate you joining us this week. We hope to see you again on Cup Connection next week.